Hello and welcome back to Bite Size Kierkegaard. So, if you're just joining me, you probably want to check out some of the introductory videos. But just to keep it short, I'm just a non-expert going through Kierkegaard's writings, kind of explaining my interpretation and what stands out for me. So, getting that out of the way, today we're starting with either or Enten Eller, the start of Kierkegaard's official authorship, what he considered to be his official authorship, which has been kind of promised in some previous videos. And we're finally here today. So let me set this aside real quick. We'll get back to that. Um, I want to start out by clearing up a little bit of a misconception I had. In a previous video, I said Kierkegaard only took one trip out of the country. It wasn't quite right. He did actually take 3 trips to Berlin. The first one is like a long winter trip where he listened to Schelling's lectures. We went over that over the last video, and actually I found this in this book called Written Images. So there's a journal that he kept. He kept some lecture notes in. Just kind of interesting. Don't know how well you can see that, but yeah, some little artifacts at the time. But yeah, he apparently tried to recapture this experience, this first visit to Berlin, and these subsequent visits. And I think he talks about this a bit in Repetition, trying to relive these experiences and finding that it doesn't really work that way. Like, you can't really recapture that, which is kind of a similar, there's a similar thread to that in either or too, but we'll get into that about experiencing, having the experience, a poetic experience almost. Other than that, there was also a trip to Jutland, his family's homeland, his father's homeland, where his father grew up, and this happened after he passed the theological examination in 1840. And in a similar way, he went to Berlin for the first time after he broke off his engagement with Regine in 1841. So that I have a little timeline here, but it seems to be like a little pattern. Like, there's a momentous decision or some big event, and then there's a trip. Interesting. Just a quick timeline. 1813, Kierkegaard was born. 10 years later, Regine was born, his future fiance and not wife, as we'll see. 1840, he passes that degree and goes to Jutland. And then after that, he actually proposes in September. So he returns from Jutland in August, proposes to Regine the next month. But then a year later, in August 1841, he returns, the ring, defends his dissertation, which is which we went through last time, which I have under here, is the concept of irony. That was his dissertation. He defends that. And then after that, in October 11th, he makes the final break with Regine. And then October 25th, you can see the same month, he goes to Berlin. So it seems to be like, big decision, then I'm going to go take a trip. And then he returns from Berlin, the next year in March. So that's quite a long trip. And then in 1843, we have Either Or published. And then I just have some notes here that also 1843, he takes a second trip to Berlin. 1845, he takes the third and final trip to Berlin. If you look online, there's also a reference to a brief trip to Sweden, which I cannot track down for the life of me. I'm sure it's in a journal or diary somewhere, but anyway, I'm guessing that might be Malmo, which is right across the bridge from Copenhagen. If you ever visit Copenhagen, it's kind of nice. It's part of what's called the Schengen zone, where you don't have to, do visa checks and everything. You can kind of travel freely within there. So hop on the train, go spend the day in Sweden, and then come back. So I'm thinking that it might have been something like that. I'm just speculating. If you can find the reference to that, please point it out. Comment for sure. But yeah, that's setting up some of the timeline. So this was a pretty momentous book. Oh, and I also want to. I missed the bookmark last time, I think, but the bookmark today, my grandmother's old bookmarks, is this one from New Zealand. And I picked it because it's made of this wood. It's a very, very thick wood bookmark. I picked it because it reminds me of, a writing desk is made of wood. and we'll get into this in a little bit. But this is part of the distancing. Actually, we can get into it now. Actually, this is part of the distancing. So Kierkegaard published this anonymously, and it says, yeah, unfortunately on the front here, kind of against his wishes, it says Søren Kierkegaard. I mean, for our lack of confusion, this is made clear, but he wanted to really distance himself. So if you see on the original title page, it says, edited by Victor Eremita, Victor the Hermit. And then Victor Eremita, he's doing like Inception. He's trying to distance himself even further. Like Victor Eremita is not even the author of these two books. It's volume 1 and volume 2. Victor Eremita says, I found these in a desk somewhere, and it's been like 5 years, and I decided to publish it finally. So he's distancing with time even. It's trying to say like, okay, a lot of time has passed. I don't know who these people are. I speculate one of them's from Holland, or it's just a lot of like effort bending over backwards to try to make it pseudonymous. If you remember before, in the concept of irony, there's this concept of distancing, and that I think is where it's coming from. That we don't want to get distracted by the author. Kierkegaard is putting out these thoughts and doesn't want people to be preoccupied with speculating that, oh, this is Kierkegaard or what or so forth. And then just to explain a bit about this, it's really funny actually. So this is in the historical introduction written by the Hongs, Howard and Edna Hong. Let's see here. So Kierkegaard went to great lengths to protect the pseudonymity of either or. Not only was the transcribing of the final copy done by various hands, lest the secret be detected and divulged by someone at the printing house, but he added an element to his usual practice of walking and conversing in the streets of Copenhagen. And then this is quoting Kierkegaard. If I wanted to tell about it, a whole book could be written on how ingeniously I've fooled people about my pattern of life. During the time I was reading proofs of either or and writing the upbuilding discourses, I had almost no time to walk the streets. I then used another method. Every evening when I left home exhausted and had eaten at Minnie's, I stopped at the theater for 10 minutes, not 1 minute more. Familiar as I was, I counted on there being several gossips at the theater who would now say, every single night he goes to the theater, he does not do another thing. And then Kierkegaard ends with, oh, you darling gossips, thank you. Without you, I could never have achieved what I wanted. So there's an idea that he's like keeping up appearances. During the intermission at the theater, he's going to slip in to sort of be seen, and everyone knows like, okay, he's busy. Like, wow, he's really going to the theater a lot. To give the illusion that this guy has not got time to write this. So distancing to the point where it's like, it's not possible for this guy to write this because he's spending all his time messing around, and then he's relying on the gossips to spread that. So pretty funny. And then this part I really love. Let me see if I could find this, but so this is in the voice of Victor Eremita, Victor the Hermit, saying how he discovered these papers. So he's saying, I found it in this, like a secondhand dealer. There's like an antiques dealer. My daily walking route took me past this secondhand dealer, and I really was fixing my eyes on this desk, like lusting after this purchase. And he could see it from the window, so every time he walked by, he was like, "I need this desk." Basically, he eventually caved in, and he set it up in his apartment. He said, and he set it up in such a way it sounded like it was by the window. So even when he walks by his apartment, he could look in and see, there's my desk, that's, like, I think we've all, sort of had lusted after these sort of things, and then we get them, and it's like, it's so nice to have this, like it could be like a car or a house or things like that. I think we have similar experiences with that. And then he's talking about, he keeps some of his money in the desk. So this desk has a lot of little drawers that kind of come out, and he has one drawer that sounds like it's dedicated to putting some money, spending cash for going out and having fun. And there's just one time where he needed a ride, and he was trying to get money out for a ride, and the drawer got stuck. And he's just describing how it's like, like, I need the money, but it's not coming out. So he took this hatchet and he like took it to the desk because he was getting frustrated. That drawer didn't budge, but there was a secret drawer that he discovered then, and out popped these papers, supposedly these two volumes. You can see this one's pretty thick, like, okay, that's a lot of paper. So like, they just came out. And then he was like going through and he discovered that okay, these are written by two different authors. This is like letters to each other. There's this one guy who he calls A. There's other guy who he calls B. A, everything in part one are A's papers, and everything in part two is B's papers, and they're different characters. But I wanted to mention, and I'll put a image up. But Kierkegaard's own desk kind of reminded me of this, because if you look at it, they carefully cataloged where all of his own papers were at the time he died in his life, and he kept all his little papers, in the drawers and stacked and so forth. So you can just imagine that maybe this is the desk he's talking about, or a desk just like this, that you can imagine like, oh, look at all these little drawers, and it's very easy to hide something in something like this once you see that image of it, that diagram. Interesting. So, but yeah, just setting it up basically like those two authors writing to each other, A and B, very different characters, and they're all made up by Kierkegaard. So one A is kind of like he's really like a playboy, and this is the guy who infamously wrote The Seducer's Diary, which is part of this volume. We start off with this Diapsalmata, which is just aphorisms and pretty famous aphorisms. We'll get into it, but this is stuff like marry or do not marry, you'll regret it either way, those sort of things. And then he goes into this like huge, like detailed discussion about Mozart's Don Giovanni, some other things, and then ends it with The Seducer's Diary, which, as it turns out, some people have sort of published on its own because they get a kick out of it. It's sort of controversial, but yeah, we'll get into that when the time comes. We're close, but any case, yeah, that's A basically, and B could not be more different. Basically, B is settled in life, a bit older. He's a married man, and so he's writing to A with this perspective of marriage, and he knows like, I've been through that, I know the passions, but it's like eventually you got to settle down, man. Like you can't just keep this up, like you got to settle down. And it turns out I think married life is the best, and it's interesting because you could kind of feel Kierkegaard debating that these are two kind of paths that maybe he could have gone down in life, or but he's kind of like playing them out and trying to see the benefits and trying to weigh the pros and cons of either or, right, basically. And you could call one author either, the other author or, maybe. Unfortunately, when Kierkegaard was teased later on by the Corsair, what's called the Corsair affair, people, this was famous. It just made him famous, basically. People knew it was him. They found it out eventually, but they called Kierkegaard either or. They taunted him in the street and they called him either or, either or. In any case, yeah, we'll get into more of this. One more thing I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting because it kind of links up to a little bit of what we did previously. The very first book we did was the early polemical writings, and in there was some criticism of Hans Christian Andersen, and then some speculation as to drama, and maybe they didn't have a good relationship. I thought it was interesting at the end of the historical introduction here, which is on page 19, actually the unnumbered pages, just XIX 19 in Roman numerals. There's a little note that says, actually Kierkegaard later on, 1849, actually, there was a second edition of Either Or published, and Kierkegaard actually mailed a copy to Hans Christian Andersen, kind of as a goodwill gesture. And Hans Christian Andersen, there's just this preserved letter from him from May 15th, 1849. And Hans Christian Andersen says, "Dear Mr. Kierkegaard, you have given me a really great pleasure by sending me your either or. I was, as you well understand, quite surprised. I had no idea at all that you entertained friendly thoughts of me, and yet I now find it to be so. God bless you for it. Thank you, thank you. Yours with heartfelt sincerity, Hans Christian Andersen, H.C. Andersen." So I think that wraps it up, for sure. Like there was some drama, but I think they got over it. So actually, one more thing I wanted to leave with for this video, kind of a more personal, incidental thing. But one of the colleges I went to, there was a man named Vernard Eller who taught there about philosophy and biblical studies in general, and he was into Kierkegaard. And you'll notice his last name is Eller, the same spelling as the Danish Enten Eller, which is the title of the book, either or. And so when he had a son, he actually named his son Enten. So his full name was Enten Eller. Kind of a fun tidbit there, and a little bit of a extended connection to our family. I think friend or family of a family, like they knew him, but I didn't really know him. Actually, I have one of his books that has a little postcard in it. I think it's like postcard from the editor or some little correspondence where they're writing to each other. But he called this book the Sex Manual for Puritans, which is kind of weird, funny. But anyway, that's another little incidental connection that I have. But Enten Eller. So his name was literally either or. So interesting time. So. But that's it for this video. Next time we'll get into the Diapsalmata, which are a bunch of aphorisms, and we might go on from there into the Don Giovanni territory. But that's a little bit too much for this video, and this is bite-sized Kierkegaard after all, so we'll keep it bite-sized. And I'll see you next time if you will let me. So thank you for listening. All right, see you next time. Bye.